Our leather gear is in the guest room is the 7th episode of the 5th season of 2.5 Men. This is directed by Ted Wass, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a good episode, it's not a personal favourite, I don't actually have that many thoughts, but there is one moment that I absolutely loved, and I saw it coming. I'd completely forgotten what was going to happen, but I could predict this moment, and even with that in mind, I loved it, but it's right at the end. So we'll talk about that when we get there chronologically. It starts off with Alan coming home with Jake, and Alan has bought a bowl to put the house keys in. And Charlie doesn't want the bowl to be on display because he doesn't like it. And they get into this huge argument about how everything in the house is Charlie's and nothing is Alan's, and how Alan doesn't feel like he's properly welcome there, and this is basically the premise for the full episode. I will say it gets a little bit repetitive at times, not completely, it was never boring, but there's not a lot of variety in what happens. A little while later, Charlie comes in with a woman called Nina, played by Jennifer Taylor, and he becomes enraged immediately because Alan's key bowl is no longer where it was, it's now on the table with butterscotch candies in it. And I did love the moment where he storms through to Alan's bedroom and just pours the candy on top of his head. It was a very well executed moment, and he, in his anger, he happens to mention that Nina is just a random one-night stand and her opinion doesn't count because Alan asked her for her opinion on the bowl. It was an awkward moment for Charlie, but again, very well delivered, a very well executed moment. And Alan ends up leaving with Jake. Jake doesn't have to go. Charlie is quite happy for Jake to stay there, but according to Alan, where Alan goes, Jake has to go. Jake's not thrilled either. And they end up going to Evelyn's, and Evelyn's not happy either. Not a lot of happiness in this episode. Evelyn and Teddy are supposed to be spending the night together, but of course Alan and Jake are there. And Charlie then talks to Berta. Berta's in this a little bit. I liked Berta's role in this, and she asks Charlie what Alan has done to make him leave, and Charlie explains he bought an ugly bowl and put it on the front table, which on the one hand highlights how ridiculous this situation is, but I think it's also fair to say that this isn't really about the bowl. Certainly for Alan, it's fair for him to not feel like this isn't his home. It's still very much Charlie's house. Charlie says what happens. Charlie gets the final say on the decor, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing because it's Charlie's money, but at the same time, Alan's his brother. He should try and make him feel a little bit more welcome, even though he doesn't really want him there. So I can see the arguments for either side, and I do think it definitely runs deeper than just being about a random bowl. And then we're having breakfast with Alan, Jake, Teddy, and Evelyn. Jake's unhappy that there's fruit and nothing else. And Teddy decides to try and talk with Alan to make him realise that Charlie is his brother. He should try and mend this while he still has the chance. I thought it was pretty obvious that Teddy didn't actually have a brother, or at least this wasn't about a real brother. And it doesn't work, so Teddy ends up going to talk with Charlie and tries the same tactic. And again, it doesn't work. So Evelyn and Teddy come up with their own plan, and Evelyn turns up on Charlie's doorstep saying that she and Teddy had a fight. And I have to say, this seems like a plan that should work, because if it comes down to either Alan or Evelyn at Charlie's house, I feel like Charlie would choose Alan. And he does invite Alan back into his house because it's the lesser of two evils. And we're pretty much at the end of the episode. There's not a lot of variety. Evidently, there's not a lot, for me, there's not a lot of comedy. There are not a lot of things that I want to share, a lot of specific moments. There are not that many quotes that I want to share. It's an okay episode. I still enjoyed it. I just don't think it's necessarily as strong as a lot of the others, but it's still good. But then we have this final moment that I just think was just absolute perfection, because a few scenes previously, Charlie was talking about how he was sizing up Alan's room for a pool table. And then, of course, Charlie invites Alan back into the house, and Alan goes to take his bags back to his bedroom, and he opens the door, and it's very, very different. And there is a pool table, center stage, and everything's just completely different. And it was such a great reveal, and I really thoroughly enjoyed that moment. That, for me, was definitely a personal highlight. I also loved Jake's attitude in this. I just thought he was pretty entertaining, and in general, I liked it. There isn't anything about it that didn't work. I just don't think it was necessarily quite as funny as some other episodes, but nevertheless, our leather gear is in the guest room, is still an enjoyable episode of Two and a Half Men, and I'm sure it's one that I'll enjoy whenever I watch it again.